Sarah Martinez had seen enough in her 5 years as an emergency room nurse to trust her instincts. So when the same man appeared on her subway car 3 days in a row, watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl, every alarm bell in her head started ringing. It started on a Tuesday evening in November. The downtown metro was packed with the usual rush hour crowd, commuters buried in phones, students with oversized backpacks, and office workers counting down the minutes until they could collapse at home. Sarah found her usual spot near the back corner, earbuds in, trying to decompress from another 12-hour shift at St. Mary's Hospital. That's when she noticed him. Mid-40s, average height, wearing a navy jacket that had seen better days. Nothing remarkable about him except for one thing. His eyes were locked on her with laser focus. When their gazes met accidentally, Sarah offered a polite nod, the kind strangers exchange in crowded spaces. But instead of looking away, he continued staring. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, pretending to check her phone. Maybe he was just zoning out, she told herself. People do that on public transport. But when she glanced up again 2 minutes later, his stare hadn't wavered. The next morning, there he was again. Same car, same intense stare. This time, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She changed seats at the next stop, moving to the complete opposite end of the train. When she looked back, he had turned in his seat to maintain visual contact. By the third day, Sarah's hands were shaking as she descended into the subway station. She considered taking a cab, but her nurse's salary barely covered her student loans, let alone daily rides across the city. She needed this job, and she needed this train. As the doors slid open, her heart sank. There he was, in the exact same spot as before. This time, he didn't even pretend to look elsewhere. The moment Sarah stepped onto the car, his eyes found her and stayed there. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Was he planning something? Following her home? She thought about her self-defense training from nursing school, how to break free from various holds, where to strike if cornered. But surrounded by other passengers, she felt a false sense of security. That security evaporated when she reached her stop. As Sarah stepped onto the platform, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, already knowing what she'd see. The man was following her, maintaining a distance of about 20 feet. Sarah's heart began hammering against her ribs. She walked faster. So did he. She took a detour through the shopping district, weaving between storefronts and late-evening shoppers. He stayed with her, never closing the distance, but never falling behind. Sarah ducked into a 24-hour pharmacy, pretending to browse the aisles while watching the entrance through the security mirror. He waited outside, leaning against a lamppost, like he had all the time in the world. After 15 minutes, Sarah approached the pharmacist, a kind-faced woman in her 60s. "Excuse me," Sarah whispered. "There's a man outside who's been following me. Could you call the police?" The pharmacist immediately moved to the window, spotting the man under the streetlight. "Of course, honey. You stay right here." But as they watched, the man suddenly straightened up and walked away, disappearing around the corner as if he'd sensed their conversation. The police arrived 20 minutes later. Officer Martinez, no relation despite the shared last name, took Sarah's statement with professional concern. "Has he approached you directly?" Officer Martinez asked. "No, just watching and following." "Any threats or verbal contact?" Sarah shook her head. "I understand this is frightening," the officer said gently. "But legally, we can't act on someone staring on public transport. However, if he follows you home or makes any direct contact, call us immediately." Sarah nodded, but inside, she felt helpless. The system couldn't protect her until something actually happened. The next 3 days passed without incident. Sarah began to hope the police visit had scared him off. Maybe he'd found someone else to fixate on. Maybe she could return to her normal routine without constantly looking over her shoulder. Then, on Monday morning, he was back. This time something was different. Instead of his usual intense stare, his expression seemed desperate, pleading. When their eyes met, she saw something that made her pause. Tears. Sarah tried to ignore it, but throughout the 20-minute ride, she found herself glancing back. The man looked broken, like someone carrying an impossible weight. Despite every instinct screaming at her to stay away, something in his expression tugged at her heart. The same instinct that had made her choose nursing over a safer, better-paying career. When Sarah reached her stop, she noticed he didn't follow. Instead, he remained seated, still watching her through the window as the train pulled away. That evening, Sarah was unlocking her apartment door when she heard footsteps on the stairs behind her. She turned, key ready to use as a weapon if necessary, and froze. It was him. "Please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know how this looks, and I know you're scared, but I need your help." Sarah's hand moved to her phone. "Stay back. I'm calling the police." "My name is David Chen," he said quickly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "You helped my father 3 weeks ago at St. Mary's. You were the only one who treated him like a human being instead of just another case number." Sarah's finger hovered over the emergency dial. Something about his voice, the raw desperation in it, made her pause. "You work in the emergency department," David continued. "My father came in with severe abdominal pain. You stayed past your shift to make sure he was comfortable while we waited for test results." A memory flickered. An elderly Asian man, confused and frightened, speaking broken English. His son translating, looking exhausted and worried. Sarah had brought them blankets and tea, sat with them when things got busy, explained each procedure in terms they could understand. "Mr. Chen," Sarah said slowly, lowering her phone. "Your father? Is he okay?" David's composure cracked. Tears spilled down his cheeks. "He's dying. The tests showed pancreatic cancer, but it's operable. The problem is..." His voice broke. "We can't afford the surgery. Insurance won't cover it because they consider it experimental. We've been to 12 different hospitals. They all say the same thing." Sarah felt her heart sink. She'd seen this story too many times. Families destroyed not by disease, but by a system that prioritized profit over human lives. "I'm sorry," she said genuinely, "but I don't understand why you followed me. There's nothing I can do about insurance policies." "You're wrong," David said. "You can do everything." He pulled out his phone, showing her a news article. The headline read, "Local Nurses Advocacy Leads to Life-Saving Surgery for Uninsured Patient." Sarah stared at the screen in confusion. "I don't understand." "Dr. Williams, you know her from the ER. She told me about this case from last year. A nurse fought for her patient, made calls, wrote letters, contacted the media. The story went viral and donations poured in. The patient got his surgery." Sarah remembered the case. The nurse had been criticized by administration for going outside proper channels, but the patient had survived. "David," Sarah said carefully, "I can't promise anything. The hospital has strict policies about..." "I'm not asking you to break rules," David interrupted. "I'm asking you to care. The way you cared about my father that night. You saw him as a person, not a number. That's all I need, someone who sees us as human beings worth fighting for." Sarah looked at David's tear-streaked face, then at the article on his phone. Every rational part of her mind said to walk away. Get involved, and she could lose her job. Fail, and she'd have given this family false hope. But the part of her that had chosen nursing, the part that believed healthcare was a human right, not a privilege, couldn't ignore his plea. "Tell me about your father," she said. David's face lit up with desperate hope. "His name is Wei Chen. He's 72 years old, worked construction for 40 years. Never missed a day, never complained. He came to America with nothing and built a life through pure determination. He deserves better than dying because he can't afford to live." Over the next hour, sitting in Sarah's small apartment, David painted a picture of a man who'd sacrificed everything for his family. Wei had worked double shifts to put David through college, never taking a vacation, never buying anything for himself. Now, when he needed the system to work for him, it had failed. The surgery would cost $150,000, David explained. We've mortgaged the house, sold everything we own. We have $30,000. It's not enough. Sarah felt the familiar anger rising, the same anger that filled her every time she watched patients suffer because of money. But anger alone wouldn't save Wei Chen. "I'll make some calls," she said finally. "But David, you have to understand, I'm just one nurse. I can't guarantee anything." David grabbed her hands. "You're not just one nurse. You're the nurse who stayed late to comfort a scared old man. You're the nurse who made him feel human in a place where people become symptoms and bills. That's not nothing. That's everything." The next morning, Sarah arrived at work an hour early. She'd spent the night researching patient advocacy programs, charity foundations, medical crowdfunding sites. The options were overwhelming and mostly led to dead ends. Her first call was to Dr. Williams, the attending who'd mentioned the previous case. "Sarah, I remember the Chens," Dr. Williams said. "Heartbreaking case. But you have to understand, what happened last year was exceptional. Lightning doesn't strike twice." "What if it could?" Sarah pressed. "What if we could make it strike?" Dr. Williams was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah, I admire your compassion, but getting involved in patients' financial situations can be complicated. Administration doesn't like when we step outside our roles." "Since when is caring about patients outside our role?" Another pause. "Meet me in my office after your shift. We'll talk." Sarah threw herself into her work that day, but Wei Chen's case consumed her thoughts. During lunch, she researched the journalist who'd covered the previous story. During breaks, she made notes about Wei's situation, his work history, his family, the specifics of his medical needs. By the time she met with Dr. Williams, Sarah had a plan. "You want to contact the media directly?" Dr. Williams looked skeptical. "Not just media, patient advocacy groups, medical charities, social media campaigns. The previous case succeeded because it became a story people could connect with. Wei Chen's story is just as compelling." Dr. Williams leaned back in her chair. "Sarah, if administration finds out you're using hospital information to contact outside organizations, then I won't use hospital information. I'll use the information David gave me as a private citizen who cares about a fellow human being." "And if this backfires? If the family gets their hopes up and nothing happens?" Sarah met her gaze steadily. "Then at least I'll know I tried. Can you live with yourself if we do nothing and Wei Chen dies because we were too afraid to care?" Dr. Williams studied Sarah for a long moment, then opened her desk drawer and pulled out a business card. "Rebecca Torres, health reporter for Channel 7. She covered the story last year. If anyone would be interested in Wei's case, it would be her. But Sarah, be careful. Once this story gets out, there's no controlling where it goes." That evening, Sarah called Rebecca Torres. The reporter listened intently as Sarah explained Wei's situation, his decades of hard work, his son's devotion, and the system's failure to help them. "It's a compelling story," Rebecca said, "but I need to verify everything independently. Can you connect me with the family?" Sarah arranged a meeting between Rebecca and the Chens. 3 days later, the story aired during the evening news. The segment was heartbreaking. Wei, barely able to sit up in bed, talking about his life in America. David, showing pictures of his father's construction work. Sarah, speaking passionately about the human cost of healthcare inequality. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The news station's phones rang constantly. Social media exploded with shares and comments. A GoFundMe account, set up by Rebecca with the family's permission, began climbing rapidly. But it was the call on Friday morning that changed everything. Sarah was finishing her shift when David called, his voice barely recognizable through tears of joy. "Sarah, you're not going to believe this. Memorial Hospital, the one that originally denied us, they just called. Someone contacted them, offering to pay for the entire surgery. Everything. Dad's procedure is scheduled for Monday." Sarah sank into a chair. Who Who called them? They won't say, some kind of anonymous donor. But Sarah, the hospital administrator, said the donor specifically mentioned seeing Dad's story on the news and being moved by how you advocated for him. The surgery was a complete success. Way's cancer was caught early enough that the procedure removed all traces of malignancy. His recovery was faster than anyone expected, and within 6 weeks he was back to complaining about having to take things slowly, a complaint Sarah was thrilled to hear. 3 months later, Sarah received an invitation to Sunday dinner at the Chen household. She arrived to find Wei looking healthier than he had in years, helping David prepare traditional Chinese dishes. "Nurse Sarah," Wei called out, his English much improved since their first meeting. "You come, you eat, we celebrate." Over dinner, Wei told Sarah about his recovery, his plans to volunteer at a community center, his gratitude for every day he'd been given. David had returned to his job as a software engineer, no longer spending every free moment terrified of losing his father. "Sarah," Wei said as they finished eating, "David told me what you did. How you fought for Stranger. Why? Why you care so much about old man you barely know." Sarah considered the question. "When I became a nurse, I promised to care for people when they're at their most vulnerable. That doesn't end when my shift is over. It doesn't end because someone can't pay. You're not a stranger, Mr. Chen. You're a person who needed help, and I was in a position to give it." Wei nodded slowly, then reached across the table and patted Sarah's hand. "You saved my life, but more than that, you remind me that in a world that sometimes feel cold, there's still people with warm hearts." As Sarah drove home that evening, she reflected on the chain of events that had started with a frightening encounter on a subway train. David's desperate surveillance had seemed threatening, even dangerous. But sometimes, she realized, what looks like a threat is actually a plea for help. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Dad wanted me to tell you. He's cancer-free at his 6-month checkup. Clean scan. We're having another celebration dinner next Sunday. Hope you can make it." Sarah smiled, already planning what dish she'd bring. Sometimes the most important work happened outside hospital walls, in the messy, complicated space where medicine met humanity. Sometimes caring meant taking risks, making difficult calls, and trusting that doing the right thing would somehow work out. And sometimes it did. 6 months later, Sarah received a package at work. Inside was a framed photo of Wei Chen at his granddaughter's birthday party, the granddaughter he'd lived to meet because of a stranger's courage and a system that, occasionally, worked the way it was supposed to. On the back, in careful handwriting, was a message. "For the nurse who sees people, not patients, thank you for reminding us that miracles happen when good people refuse to look away." Sarah hung the photo in her locker, where it served as a daily reminder of why she'd chosen nursing and what it truly meant to care for others. Every time she saw it, she remembered that sometimes the most important question isn't whether you can help, but whether you're willing to try. And in Wei Chen's case, being willing to try had made all the difference.